Good evening, everyone. We are from the Naples Brahma Kumaris Center, and next to me is my husband Koen, and my name is Yolanda, if you didn't know that already. And today we thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about what does quantum mean for us as spiritual beings, and how could that apply into our life. And we know that today we have a lot of aspects about the quantum field and quantum theory, and scientists are trying to prove things. So Koen is quite scientific oriented, and I think it would be nice if we could ask him some questions and see how what he can share with us. So how would you see that everything is connected, and how does it all work, and can you give us a practical example?
Well, I've always been interested in the dynamics of science versus religion, and that seems to have played a role in my life since I was 9 years old, when I attended a Catholic elementary school run by Irish nuns. And I remember one day I came to school and I told my teacher, who was the head nun, that my brother, who was at the grammar school, he was 14, I was 9, that he said that we as human beings came into being through a process of evolution. And she was very shocked to hear that, and she said I had to go and talk to him and straighten the record and to tell him that it was actually God who created us. And of course I never did that. I didn't think I would stand a chance against a 14-year-old. But that kind of set up in my mind this, why is there this conflict between science and religion? Because really science is a search for the truth in an objective manner, while religion or spirituality is a search for the truth in a subjective manner. So when you're trying to experience something or feel something, it's a much more subjective approach. But ultimately, if they both lead to the truth, then why should there be a conflict? Because then they should both discover the same thing. And then later on in my career or my studies, I came across quantum science or quantum mechanics, and I realized that that might be the point that they had in common, science and religion, and that was something that could maybe connect the two, and both have that foundation of truth through our knowledge and our growing knowledge, because it's certainly not anywhere near full yet, of the quantum field. So that's a bit of the background of why I'm so interested in all things quantum.
And what do you think that there was anywhere something relevant said in the past that could actually make us think light is energy, and how is light created in the first place?
Just this, we see a bit more of you. Yes, so it turns out that most major religions, if not all of them, have some kind of story of creation as their source. And coming from a Christian background, if I look at the Bible and the first few verses in Genesis, which talks about the creation of God, and every day he created something new, and the whole creation process took 7 days. What I found fascinating is that on the first day it says God said, "Let there be light," and he created light. And on the 4th day he said, let there be a sun and the moon and the stars. And I thought, well, you know, our visual ability to see light comes from the sun, and at night, obviously, to the reflection of the sun in the moon. But if that's the case, then what is this light that happened on day one? Where does that come from, and what is that exactly? And I realized in studying quantum physics is that that light is actually the photons that is at the source of everything that surrounds us, everything in the universe is made of, is that light, those photons. And that I found that quite fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure not many people thought about that, right? The light was created on the first day, and then later only the sun, the moon, and what we see as physical light. Yeah. Can you give us an example of how those photons work together, and how we are connected through light? Is there anything you can remember, or a story?
Yes, well, that's I could write a book this thick, or I've read books that thick rather, about that. So in the 20 minutes that we have, there are things that science has observed over the years, and one of the things I'd like to talk about is the Maharishi effect, which happened in the 1960s, where a yogi, Maharishi, from the transcendental meditation background, or the founder of that, he proposed that if people meditated, that they could improve the quality of life of the community around them. And he involved scientists who set up a fairly objective experiment where he had a number of people meditating, and they measured the amount of accidents, crime, drug-related crime, shooting crime, all the things in the Washington, D.C. area. And they actually found that there was a decrease in that, so the quality of life did in fact improve because of these people meditating, and they came up with a formula like the square root of 1% of people meditating can affect that community. In other words, if 2 people meditate, they could affect a community of 400. And it only takes 1,700 people to meditate in sync to affect the entire United States of America. So that's pretty remarkable, and it was a huge social experiment success at the time.
That's very promising.
And then, of course, you ask yourself, well, how does that happen? How is that possible? And that's where we get into a little bit more the technical aspects of what is quantum. And you know, we've all heard of Isaac Newton, one of the great scientists in history, who discovered the motion of the planets relative to each other, and then he talked about gravity and the effect of planets on each other. And his conclusions led us to be able to do a number of things very important to our communities at large, such as the ability to monitor and predict tides, which allowed farming in tidal areas. We could predict comets. We could send spaceships to the moon, and our whole space exploration is based on our knowledge of those planetary motions. And of course, the field of astrology would not have been possible without that knowledge. And then, you know, science came a long way since then, obviously. We started studying the atom, and we realized that the atom is also consists of a very small nucleus with electrons whizzing around, very much like a planetary system, really. And the interesting thing is that the universe is 99.999% space, and so is an atom. But even though we thought that the atom would behave in a very similar way, it was actually completely different at the micro subatomic level. And it turns out that an electron whizzes around the nucleus of an atom, but you can't quite determine where that electron is located. And it's more like it's a wave of probability of where it might be at any point in time, and it's pure energy. And the astonishing fact is when a scientist actually observes the electron, it's like the wave of probability collapses and the electron appears at one particular spot. And so we realize that at a quantum level, at the subatomic level, our consciousness, the actual act of observing, affects what is going on at the subatomic level. And that's incredible.
Do you think that we do that on a daily basis? That happens automatically, of course, but it could make a difference if we became all very conscious of that and the changes that could be made because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I heard somebody did some test with a plant once, and that was remarkable. That was a beginning of opening eyes. Is that really so? And if that is so, then we are all part of this oneness. Can you give an example of that?
Yes, so there's one other aspect that I have to just mention, and that's the concept of entanglement. And that is where scientists were able to isolate a photon, which is a particle or a wavelet of light, split it in two and send one down a pipeline and many miles away, and the other one went the other way. And what they managed to observe is that the activity of one of them was identically replicated by the one at the other end of the pipeline, even though it was many, many miles away. And not only was it was identical simultaneously at exactly the same time. So this is what makes quantum stranger than you can imagine. Because, there has to be some kind of connection between the two, but there seems to be no time lapse. So when we think about you can't travel faster than the speed of light, somehow that doesn't apply to entanglement. And the whole concept of entanglement will be used in the up-and-coming quantum computers. That will be the next big thing in computers. So you have this weird thing called entanglement, and this thing where the consciousness appears to affect the energy of a subatomic particle, and it seems to change the energy into matter. So those two things really puzzled a scientist like Einstein, who couldn't quite wrap his head around that one.
The thing that Einstein said about quantum entanglement, it's a spooky thing. And today I heard that a scientist from Scotland actually made a picture to prove it. So we're already that far. I don't know how real it is and how true it is, but you can look it up if you like.
Yes, so the plant experiment you referred to was done by a gentleman called Clive Baxter, who was in fact the inventor of the lie detector that the FBI and the CIA started using, where you put an electrode on the skin, and the electrode measures the level of fluid flowing between those two electrodes. And if you're talking and you start lying, it slightly increases the heart rate, so it changes the blood flow. And that difference in fluid flowing between the two electrodes is what produces the graph going crazy. So they proved that if somebody lies, the graph is doing this all day. You know, they had some stimulus going through their
I
body.
have one at home too, by the way.
I plead not guilty. Right. So Clive Baxter then decided, what if we could apply this to a plant? And he picked a geranium plant. It has a nice large green leaf. He put the electrodes on the plant and then sat back and waited for some kind of response. And nothing happened. Absolutely nothing. And then he thought, well, maybe the plant needs to be stimulated. So he thought, well, a good stimulation would be to burn one of the leaves. So he grabbed a box of matches, and before he even struck the match, the chart that the plant was hooked up to suddenly went off the chart, as it were. And this was, of course, astonishing because he hadn't physically done anything.
So do you think he picked up the emotion, the intention, even without the action?
Somehow the plant picked up a negative intention from the human.
Interesting.
And then he expanded the experiment, and he went into another office, and he just thought about harming the plant. And every time he sent thoughts to that plant, the plant reacted instantly. So that was a very peculiar experiment, and you wonder, well, how is that possible? And the only kind of hint that we have is that it's somehow connected to this entanglement.
So we humans actually, if a plant does that, then the intentions and the thought forms that we hold has an immediate effect on the environment and on other people around us. Is one of the reasons, I think, why when somebody is very compassionate and loving and kind with that intention, that we always feel good around people like that.
It's very interesting that you say that, because there was a Russian scientist who developed a machine that could measure the biophotons that a living being emits. And it turns out that every living being emits biophotons. So we are emitting light all the time. And he measured that, and you get that aura, the picture of the aura that surrounds a person, and that's called the Kirlian photography, after the scientist's name. So that's where that came from. And what is interesting is when you have a healer and he goes into his healing mode, the biophotons emitted is measurably increased. And then the other thing they found, that if there was intention behind it, a positive, a good intention, it would increase the light. And if there was a negative intention or a negative emotion or negative thought, it would diminish the light. So that gave us the idea that your thoughts and your feelings that you carry around with you do have an effect on the light around you and on the light in beings around you. So that puts quite a responsibility on you, because you know when you've met somebody and you feel drained, that effect, or you meet somebody and you feel incredibly uplifted. And that is a reflection of the state of mind of that person.
So we're actually all broadcasters all the time.
All the time.
We broadcast energy out, and through our reactions or non-reactions. And I was really wondering, you know, if you have a state already where you kind of feel liberated and you become non-reactive, so you keep that state of peace all the time. How wonderful that must be, right? Also for not only for yourself, but for the surroundings as well. And meditation surely helps with that. And the clarification of what we do through our meditation, that purification process, how that actually can start creating and emanating this pure energy, and how it can shift your aura. Yeah?
Yes, so maybe the greatest gift that you can give to the world is shining your light on other living beings, because that has a kind of positive feedback loop in which when you do that, you feel good, because you're sending light, you're sending love to whether it's another human being, an animal, or a plant.
Yes, yes.
And as you do that, you are, when you say, I will send you light, that is literally true. You are sending light.
Through the thought form, through the love of the heart, all that in combination creates a certain quality of light,
right.
or not a good quality.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that positive feedback loop is where you are giving that, and as you give, you also receive. You feel better as you do that, and because you feel better, the quality of your light improves, which reinforces the feel good of it. So that's maybe the greatest gift that we have.
Yeah.
Sending light.
I remember when I just started with meditation, and one of the senior teachers was coming to Australia, and we were driving to the event, and suddenly I felt this presence of this incredible loving energy, and I said to Koen, I think this senior master has arrived. It was the very first time that we met a senior teacher at that time. And well and behold, it was indeed that energy that we picked up in the car, even being an hour away from the retreat. So it's definitely, we have experienced, both of us, the validity of this truth, that when the light is expanded in such an extent that you can start feeling that person from very far.
And just to illustrate how important this could be, and in my opinion, this is our next step in evolution, is our understanding of how we interact with the quantum and what it would enable us to do. They did an experiment on whether your emotions can affect your DNA. So they hooked up some electrodes to part of the body, and then they altered the emotional state of the person by showing him video images, whether it was anger, fear, grief, all of the standard emotions that a human would go to, and then they measured the effect on the DNA, effectively, is what they were looking at. And it turned out that every time the emotion changed, there was a big reaction. And then they thought, well, would this happen if that DNA was separated from the body? And so they took some DNA, some skin or some hair, can't remember what it was, put it on the table and hooked up the electrodes, stimulated the emotion, and the exact same results. And then they put it in another room, same thing. And then they put it further and further away. And ultimately they put it into a different state in Colorado and hooked up everything with an atomic clock that measured absolute tiny fractions of a second. And they found that the stimulus of the emotion of the person in one state, let's say Florida, affected the DNA in Colorado instantly. There was zero time lag. And the only scientific explanation that's available now is that somehow the DNA is entangled with the body and the feelings and the emotions, the consciousness. It's all connected. Because it happens at a distance, it happens at exactly the same time, exactly like those photons that were split that we talked about. So
that really means that we are all responsible for the world and the global energy, isn't it? Because the more we actually share this more pure light into the world, then even with one thought, it could change everything. And I once heard that if 1% of civilization, world civilization, would have this consciousness, all the rest would follow through osmosis, actually, right? Like the monkey effect on the islands.
The Maharishi effect, really.
Yeah.
That's the same thing.
Yes.
Well, the other thing that I wanted to mention, which is also very interesting, is science has no law that explains the existence of the universe. They have a theory called the Big Bang Theory, where they assume that because of the way the universe is moving and it's expanding and accelerating all the time, that at one point it all came together into what they call a singularity, a tiny, almost so small that it's invisible, particle containing everything, and that one day that exploded and created the universe as we know it. And if you think about that photon that we split and that they were entangled, could that mean that everything that was in that tiny singularity is also all connected, and when it became the universe, it is still all connected? So every living being, every piece of consciousness that we all have, it's all connected.
Wow.
And that's why it's so important to keep your own being and your own state of being as elevated as possible.
Yeah.
Because you are radiating that, and it affects others.
Yeah, I remember one quick example, and then we have to do a small meditation, is when my father had cancer, and I was here in the US and he was in the Netherlands, and I would have randomly in the day, I would just sit still and feel connected to the divine energy and then send it to him. And on occasions, he would call me 5 minutes later saying, "Daughter, you did it again." And I said, "What, Dad?" And he said, "Yeah, I could feel it again." So he picked it up actually within a few minutes, and he would just call me to confirm. And I thought, so this really works. That was my first experiences where because he responded so quickly, that it works, and that we can all, what we call a certain energy when someone is sick, and we do that as a meditation group as well. We always, with a whole lot of concentrated energy to that person, and it will give a lot of comfort, or indeed it could heal, all depending on what is in the drama of such a person. Yeah. Okay, that was very nice. I think we all more enlightened now.
Well, just to mention that is really the future of the whole scientific investigation in the quantum, is to what extent can we affect our internal being and the external environment through our thoughts, and through that connection of consciousness and the quantum field. And that, I think, is a very exciting part that I hope we discover before our time.
And then I tell you a little secret too, that as being married, sometimes things happen, or maybe there is a misunderstanding. And what I've noticed is when there is a misunderstanding and mentally there is no connection, then just to go into that field of energy and talk from soul to soul. So instead of trying to verbalize it or to mentalize it, just to only use the energy. And that really works, because there is another dimension then that makes things to flow in harmony. So it's lovely when you are with people together and you can practice that. Saying that, we will do a little meditation, and I would like to do an experiment like I had with my father. So perhaps when we get into the meditation, you can think about somebody who really is in need of some extra love, some healing energy, some godly love, and to think about that person with concentration, sending that good energy, And then we'll just leave it like that, but perhaps that person will connect with you. Let's see. So just sit nice and straight and relax. Take a deep breath in and slowly exhale. Inhale and exhale. And now just visualize that you are pinpoint of concentrated energy, and see yourself as that energy in the middle of your forehead. And just go deeper and deeper into that infinite light. And as you can feel your inner peace, now just visualize one person in your life and send that person divine love, compassion, feeling of oneness between you and that other person. So just hold that energy for that being. And then slowly release that, coming back again to yourself. And then just close it with a deep breath and exhale. So I think we did a little bit longer than it was supposed to be, but I hope it's okay. Thank you for being here, and every Friday we have this kind of talk and meditation, I believe at 6:30 with the Brahma Kumaris Meditation Center in Miami. Good evening. Bye-bye.